Hey, this is Candia RAQUEL. Welcome to the Sensual Sessions podcast, the place to explore sensing pleasure through your senses and moving in a way that is completely free from inhibition and full of self-expression. So if you're new, please go to www.centrodepoder.com and get yourself signed up to get these episodes delivered weekly on your inbox. And today we have a very special guest. This is Astra Coyle. She is a TED speaker and she's a Feldenkrais Method practitioner. Welcome, Astra. Very happy to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
So I'm curious about what was the moment along your journey that you discovered that there's a close-knit connection between body and mind, to the point that actually it's not even a connection, it's an inseparable intertwining. And how did it shift your career, your life path?
Well, I come by it very honestly. When I was maybe 4 years old, I signed up for a ballet class. I grew up in a family that loved to dance, not trained in any way. If we had a birthday or a holiday, we would roll up the rugs and crank up the music and we would just dance very freely. And so I love music. I love to move. And when I was a little girl, there was a ballet class down the street, and I went to it. And I remember wanting to love it. I wanted to love ballet. And I found it very difficult. I was trying to contort and do these things with my body that felt very confining. And I remember being frustrated by that, and eventually, like very quickly going, because it just somehow didn't feel like it came naturally to me. And in fact, it's not very natural movement, at all.
Agreed.
In terms of functional movement, right? But somehow, because I wasn't socialized yet, right? I was very young. I was like, oh, this hurts. I don't really like this. And then was lucky enough to go to a elementary school later, like a year later, where we had tap dance. And so to get to make noise with my feet and big movements and, much less constrained, I just felt so much better and I knew it, So that connection between how we move and our mood or how we feel, I remember that very early. Like I remember it when I would try on different shoes, and be like, oh, I walk like this in these shoes. And I walk like, and just realizing what an effect how I moved had on how I felt about myself, but also just how I was thinking, how I was, feeling emotionally. So it came early. And so the Feldenkrais training came very late because, of course, then I was conditioned, like most of us, to believe that the main pursuit I needed in my life was my mind, in my education. And I have no regrets about that. However, I was an athlete. I did a lot of things, and I really thought of my body as this thing that I needed to take care of my precious brain. In a sense, that was the teaching. And the body was sort of in service that the brain perform. And fast forward to my 20s, I was searching just in life, and I studied Zen meditation. I studied yoga in India. I studied a lot of things, and I still didn't have this sense that I wanted of myself. I don't know what it was. I was searching for some feeling and I couldn't find it. I wanted to feel very, like a real clear ownership of myself. Yeah. And a reference from myself. And then I ran into a friend, and we were about 25, and I could feel it. I could see it in her. And I'm like, what are you doing? you know, and she said, oh, I'm doing this thing called the Feldenkrais method. And I was like, I went to a class and I hated it. Absolutely hated it. I couldn't stand it.
Can relate. I can relate.
I mean, they were asking me to do something without my will. And I had used my will to do everything in my life.
Yes.
And I couldn't outsmart them. You know, I couldn't outwill them. So I started studying it. And when the teachers, you know, really the lesson, right, of Feldenkrais is to be self-referential, for you to decide what's enough, for you to decide what feels good, for you to decide what you want, don't want. And that was the most important learning in my life, because until that time, I was very good at achieving other people's goals. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Being good at achieving other people's goals. I can relate to that as well.
Yeah.
And for me, the first lesson I took of Feldenkrais was devastating. Actually, I landed into a 2-week retreat. No, I was going crazy on the third day of laying on the floor doing nothing. It felt like doing nothing because I was like in my peak top shape of a contemporary dancer. I trained ballet every day, Graham technique every day, then the rehearsals, then and I was like all ripped and like lay there, sense the support of the floor, and then push the wall 1 hour. No, the first day I was like, okay, maybe this is like the background of what we are doing, like this is the foundation, and it was, but not in the way that I thought. And the third day I was like, okay, enough warm up, and I grabbed the teacher and I was like, what is it? And she told me, no, you're doing good, like just follow the process. And it blew me away that by the 5th day, almost unconsciously, I walked nonstop across the town for almost 2 hours. Like I went out of the retreat center, I wanted to get a sandwich, and walking felt so pleasurable. I mean, it was not walking, it was like gliding along life in a very delightful bodily way. And I was like, oh yes, I can feel the weight shifting and my hips and the rotation of my thorax and the swinging of the arms, like everything that I've been taught in ballet that I should do naturally. It is natural, but I was not doing it on ballet the way I was supposed to do in a natural way, but I was framed in a rigid technique and in complying with what was expected from me. So that day, like I passed in front of the cafeteria that I used to go, because like walking felt so good that I couldn't stop myself. So I went to the other end of the little town that is San Miguel de Allende in Mexico, and then came back, and then that sandwich lasted like 1 hour because I delighted in every bite, and it was like, oh no, this is amazing. And then I realized like, this is what Feldenkrais is about. I mean, not pleasure and delight itself, but being self-referential. Like, what do you think about yourself? Not how do you think that you are coming across to the perceptions of others, so they think what you want them to think, so that's what you take for yourself as your self-worth. And yeah, it was devastating and wonderful because it threw down like the false constructions of my very self and laid an open and spacious ground for my true self to emerge. Of course, this what I am telling happened over the next decade after the experience, not immediately. But
Yeah.
it was like a life-changing moment. And I am very curious on asking you about your TED Talk, where you mentioned that it's not that we in actuality operate in a mind over matter way as much as we pretend to and force to and push with all of our willpower to, but that the truth is that it's the other way around. It's matter over mind. So in a way, if we change the experience of ourself, then our self idea and our self perception changes. But the question is like, how come? Like,
Well, so yeah, I mean, if you think about it, so we have a brain, right? And it has multiple influences to the brain nervous system. Yeah. And the brain does control the body, right? So it has, we'll say, top down beliefs, mindset, things like this. And then there's the outside in. So experiences, culture, all of those things. Yeah. But then there's the bottom up, which is the biology. And that's movement, and that's genes, and that's the things that are hardwired from the moment you're born. So they're very primary. The biological drives are primary, and they're inescapable.
yes.
They influence how we react to the culture, the environment, the experiences. And those things create our mindsets, our beliefs, our thinking patterns. Yeah. So they're all in the mix, but the biology drives it. And it's the easiest place to move the needle. Yeah.
Yes.
When you work with the biology. Because look, we're animals, and what we are driven to do, consciously or not, is to live and to procreate. That's what the animals, there's this sort of drive that happens, not for everyone, right? But to live, yes. In order to live, you have to move 100% in some way, even if it's just to move your mouth to say you need help or whatever. And that's why movement is so essential and takes up so much of the brain, as we need it to survive. And there's such a drive to survive. Yeah. So again, movement is just that biology. There's so much wiring there, so much firing in the brain when you get into the body. And, if you try to follow changing your thinking patterns or your emotional patterns, it's possible. And it takes a lot of work. And the biological responses, when you know how to work with them, they're so much faster.
So much faster to work from the bottom up. And
yeah,
it definitely is the case that the nervous system is a relatively new evolutionary innovation. Like before the nervous system and the spinal column, there was already the other digestive systems. Like we see it in very primal life forms. So if we go back, there are 5 kingdoms, and the only kingdom with nervous system is the animal. So there's 80% rest of the life forms that operate and sustain the atmosphere. Trees and forests exhale, and that's why we have clouds, because of evapotranspiration. And we have bacteria, and most life is literally brainless, though it's extremely efficient, effective, and tested over thousands of millions of years to be fit and to survive. And we have this refinement in life forms. So we that are very intelligent with our brains and nervous systems identified ourselves anthropologically with that, but that's not the main strength in our physiology, in our operative.
Well, not only that, but neuroscientists now are saying that the brain, its primary drive is movement. The brain came on to provide more successful, diverse movement of the body, right? And they used to think that, like, oh, Lucy, the primate stood and then we developed this brain. No, the brain came on so Lucy would stand.
Yes, yes, yes.
And just what you're saying. And so, and I do think you're making this really interesting point, which is, this whole idea we got from Descartes, like, I think, therefore I am,
yes.
right? I think it was I'm not going to analyze Descartes, but there's something to that we wanted to distinguish ourselves from other animals, to prove some superiority, something, right? And in that proving, we got very far from the truth, which is we are animals with these biological drives. So yeah, it's very interesting. Yeah.
And the more connected we are to our physiological nature, the healthier we become and the clearer we think. And
right, all these studies now on Alzheimer's, the more you move, the chances of Alzheimer's decrease significantly. There's just so many things now we're seeing in published studies related to movement and health, way beyond your heart or these things that we used to talk about. Yeah.
And in contrast to this, like, truth, we have this societal view that we have to exert our willpower to get accomplished, and we need to hustle and even suffer and self-sacrifice for the sake of getting to a certain goal. But this willpower centered way of doing is actually tremendously inefficient. so yeah, like in Feldenkrais, it's like you don't have to comply with anyone. It's even said that Moshe Feldenkrais didn't praise anyone for ever at all. Like the more he may say is not bad, and that was like, wow, like the compliment ever. Like you can feel like accomplished and loved and whatever, because and then they say that he didn't wanted you to become like biased by his gaze and always be self-referential. So what would you say about this societal view on pushing forward and exerting willpower?
Yeah, I think anytime we're looking at a societal value, which is one of those influences on the brain, we have to ask, like, who made it and like who's it serving, right?
Okay.
I think we always have to kind of look at that and go, okay, like, how did this become the cultural value? And I think, for one, you can look at industrialization. You can look at when we suddenly started to really not live in cycles, not live in earthly cycles or seasonal cycles. And we started, let's say, I don't know, having productions of cars 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, or something like this. And that very mechanistic view of the body, of the world, is very focused on an outcome. It's very focused on a product. And I think this all is very related to the economy, right? So if you want to, will is great. I still use my will all the time. But if you want to talk about pleasure, or you're talking about the process, you're not talking about the product.
Yes.
Right.
Definitely.
So, there's a lot of different theories as to how we got there. But, for example, we used to host a party at my house, and I would be a maniac, especially when my children were very little, trying to get everything and organized and, clean this and do that. And I would be very, very tense. And my husband, and this is even after the Feldenkrais training, and my husband would say, remember, we're doing this because we wanted to have fun. Like, we wanted to have our friends over and we wanted it to be a good time. Like, is this worth it? The state that you are in, right? So this is an example. I was doing this and to then get to the product of the perfect clean house for the party, right? So I chose to start really looking at that balance. Well, what does that balance look like where I'm not so stressed? Because again, whose value is it? Do my friends really care? Where did that come from that I thought it had to be a certain way, right? Because it didn't come from my friends, right? So that's an example of we can get so focused on the outcome and so stressed to get to that outcome that we miss all of this in between. We miss all of the potential enjoyment. I took a walk before we started today, and it's very beautiful right now. The leaves are changing color. The temperature's getting cool. It's just a beautiful time of the year. And if I was just walking to, let's say, burn so many calories or get my workout in or whatever, which I do work out, I do things with a goal. But if that was my only goal and I didn't walk to see the leaves, to hear them, to hear the river, to enjoy what was happening around me, it wouldn't have been very pleasurable, at all. So I feel like, tuning into yourself, as you keep saying, like being self-referential and in your sensation, in your senses, that is what takes you to the moment, to the process, to living, versus being just about the future and the goal and the end point. And that's what that will is so focused on the outcome. And like we started this discussion, I was very good at winning the goal.
Yeah.
And one of my favorite jokes, there's a comedian, Lily Tomlin, and she says, just remember, even if you win the rat race, you're still a rat.
Bam.
That's it.
Yeah, the hamster in the wheel.
So, that's just it. I have that quote in my office because I'm always like, I still need to be reminded of it. I am somebody who likes to work hard. I actually really enjoy hard work. And striking that balance, my body and my sensation has given me this constant awareness and measure of how am I? How is it going? Have the scales tipped to too much? Am I cleaning for a party like a maniac, stressed out? Or am I still enjoying getting the house ready for a party? So sensation in my body has totally changed that, because that reference is just always there. It's always there. I'm always aware of it.
Yeah. Being focused on the sensation rather on exerting willpower just for the goal's sake, bypassing the process. And it's a radical perspective to think on achieving the goal on the deadline, because to me, sometimes it's helpful because otherwise my aloofness take over and I go all over the place. So if I have a deadline, like come hell or high water, you have to make it there.
Yeah.
But it's linear, and
Mhm.
it has the reference of an end, in contrast with the natural cycles that are endless, and that spring leads to summer, to autumn, to winter, to spring, and then there is this flow. And yes, there are solstices and equinoxes, there are deadlines to the seasons, but it's not a dying deadline. It's a transformational moment. It's an intermediate state, which is very different. It's another approach, and it doesn't mean that then we are goalless, or we are not moved by accomplishing a desire or being irresponsible. In actuality, is more that we are tending to that becoming, because we are running the process moment by moment. And then this opens room for a very different experience, not a one that leads you to the emergency room with a heart attack, or to having problems with addictions, binge eating, alcoholism, depression, whatever, just because of this tremendous cultural blind spot that we have, like, embedded already in our system. So when we move through sensitivity, something very important arises that I believe is pleasure in the doing, in the moving, in the thinking, in the feeling, as a whole. So I want to ask you on your take on sensual pleasure.
Yeah. So sensual pleasure to me, I mean, I think they go hand in hand, right? Sensuality and pleasure. I would say in a lot of North American and Western cultures, that's been co-opted into meaning something sexual, which it's not, at all.
At all.
At all. And I think that has to do with being in worlds that are the value systems. If we were to ascribe a name to some of those values, we would say they're masculine values. Yeah. And I do think taking one's pleasure and sensation back is the way to take back one's own values. And it's not separate from the culture or society, but it is in conversation with.
Yes. Conversation.
It's a dialogue, but for too many people, that dialogue is only one way. We see so many people, our students, striving for something and not being satisfied, and things not being enough. And there's sort of this perfectionistic drive, especially we see it with women. And that comes from not being the ones who are creating the values. Yeah. So when we can take that back, I think that really shifts how we feel about sensuality and about pleasure. Because, if you just look at, for example, like the self-care industry, I like to get my toenails painted, like sometimes, sure. But sometimes to take care of myself means to take a nap, to things that can't be sold, right?
Yeah.
Things that can't be commodified, things that, right? And that's really important to take that back. to take those practices back. And like we've been talking about, to have the process be something that is also satisfying for you, not just pleasing to the values and the culture that you're in. And, there's nothing wrong with wanting to be valued by your culture. We're very social creatures. That's to be human. But it's to the extent that you can balance that, then that dialogue to something that has value to you, and that you are part of the equation of creating it, not just trying to run to keep up to be the thing that you're told is valuable, So I think pleasure is a huge part of that, because like we both talked about, I like to do hard things sometimes. It gives me great pleasure, But as long as when that can come from me, that's the best. That's when it's pleasurable. When I have to strive or to hustle, and it's not coming from me, which sometimes is what we have to do. This is a reality. But when that's not coming from me, it's not pleasurable. It's a very different experience. Yeah.
That's a huge key, because having the nails done can be a pleasurable experience, but if it's not a self-referential activity, but a complying activity to the standards of beauty, in that moment, pleasure is lost that easy. Like, it's not the same to take a nap because you feel like taking a nap than getting all anxious because you didn't took your nap interval from the app that is telling you that you have to take it to fill the circle of the activity app that you share with your friends and whatever. And there's such a fine line, because when pleasure is in a way expected from you, then it's lost. Like it's pleasure is very rebellious.
Right. There has to be choice. There has to be choice.
Yeah. And like you say, sometimes we have to do what we have to do, like pay the IRS, or if you broke the window of your neighbor's car, like you have to pay it no matter what, or in an emergency or work commitments, etc. But those are very few counted instances in life where you are actually like due to comply, where you have no choice. But the 99% of the rest of the things that you do with your life, even though it's in your work and there's commitment and there's effort involved, you have the ability to choose. And the problem, I believe, is that we are not choosing enough. And something,
yeah, that's it. Choice is everything. It's everything. And you can see people, even people who are incarcerated. There are amazing stories of people who still figure out their choice. So you can even be in a very confined, restricted situation, and you can still find your agency. You can still find your agency.
Yes.
And I only know this from other people sharing that with me. And it's just so paying the IRS, whatever it is, even within that, there's agency and choice. There still is. Yeah. And how we're relating to it, and what we do and what we bring to it. And, if we take a body of, well, that's a whole other subject. I was going to say, if we take our body full of tension, to something, right? In some ways, you could say the tense and sore muscles what they are is a representation of the past.
Yes. 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 A representation of the past.
Yeah. So, so it's really about being, finding within oneself, within one's nervous system, within one's body, very small choice points, but they can make a huge difference, to our experience, even if the things that we don't want to do, maybe it's.
Yeah, even if the things we don't want to do can be done in a different way that at least is less painful and preferably can be even pleasurable. And this is a great reframe to constraints, understanding that even people incarcerated take agency and can do something with their lives. And such is the story of Moshe Feldenkrais himself. He had a very bad knee injury. They wanted to chop off his leg, and he said no. And that was like a key moment for this judoka physicist of the Sorbonne that was also working as part of the defense systems of, I think, Britain during the World Wars as a Jewish that had to run away. And he made out of those terrible, really terrible circumstances and constraints something wonderful that transformed his life for the better and provide the world with amazing tools to take ownership, to be self-referential, and finally to fully embark in this endless and wondrous journey that is to know thyself. So would you share with us a little movement experience to
Sure.
sensual pleasure?
So I was thinking that, one of the things that we're taught in many cultures is that we should have a tight core. Yeah. Right. This is like, and yet we take that advice without questioning it. Right. Yeah. Like who said this, and is it true? Right. So I thought we could do something with the core, because we know from lots of studies that if you have muscles that are contracting all of the time, they actually are weaker because they don't get to rest so they can fire well again. And we also know that when we tighten our abdomen, that's something that usually like precedes a certain act, but if we were to tighten it all the time, we can create a lot of anxiety in our nervous system very easily. So I thought we would play around with that a little bit. Yeah.
Sounds great.
Yeah. So if you're just sitting, you would feel your contact with the seat below you. And then you could just take a moment to follow the air coming in and out of your nostrils and just noticing the sensation of that air coming in and out. And it's a different temperature, perhaps, coming in than going out. And then you would just notice where else you feel that sensation of that air, maybe in the back of your throat, maybe in your neck, perhaps in your chest. Maybe you feel it in your belly or your abdomen, maybe not, or your sides or your ribs. You don't have to make anything happen. Whatever's happening is perfectly fine. You're breathing, you're alive, but you just notice what's moving. And then you could put a hand if you wanted on your belly if you need more information, but you just notice if the area below your navel moves at all as you breathe. Maybe, maybe not. And you just put your hand there and just see. For some people it does, some it does not. And it doesn't matter either way. And you could also, if you wanted, you could put a hand on your chest to see if there's any movement there. And then a few times, I want you to just take an inhalation through your nose and then let it out through your mouth. In through your nose and out through the mouth. And the next time, as you inhale through the nose, you can go ahead and draw your lower abdomen in as you inhale through the nose. So you would pull your belly in as you inhale and let it go out through your mouth. And as you do that a few times, notice what happens to your chest if you pull the belly in. Okay, and just rest. Notice your contact with the seat below you, and notice your mind, your mood, the rhythm of your breath. And now, just while resting there, go ahead and draw your lower belly in and tighten it and just go on breathing, just however you're breathing, whatever you're doing normally, with your belly drawn in, just an amount that's comfortable for you, but it's tighter than it might have been a moment ago. And just notice the effect that has on your neck and your jaw, on your throat, your chest, and if it changes your mood in any noticeable way, or your sort of your energy in any way. Maybe not. And then let it go. And when you let it go, see what happens if your breath changes, if you take a sigh, if something happens. Yeah. And a few times as you inhale, just let your belly get a little bit fuller, rounder. Purposely try to breathe into your belly so it gets a little bit bigger. And then just let the air come out however it comes out. But you could keep taking the air in through your nose and out your mouth. And then just rest. And notice your energy and your contact with the chair and just how you're feeling. Yeah. So the breath is like one of these very interesting ways that we can take something that's unconscious and make it conscious very quickly. It's a very quick way to change what's happening in the brain and the nervous system. And so you could, if I was going to teach that for a while, we would just keep playing with different things with the breath, with the chest. But as animals, if we were, either trying to freeze, we would tighten up. Yeah. If we were like trying to not be noticed, we would tighten our belly, right? Which is an anxious state. We also might pull our belly in right before we pounce and we roar. Yeah. Before we have to do something big and strong. So there can be this sort of increase in the energy in the sympathetic nervous system, right? Just by drawing the belly in and increasing the breathing in the chest. And when we let the belly soften and release, we usually find this kind of quieting in the nervous system, or what people would call grounding or something like that. So it's a very simple little way that we can play around. And there are some very quick reversals, that take 60 seconds, 3 minutes, that you can do depending. I use them different ways. Sometimes I need more energy and I'll purposely do a certain kind of thing with my abdomen and breath. And sometimes I need to take it down, but they're very quick responses, in the nervous system. Yeah.
Yeah, I could feel it immediately, like the shift in the brain chemistry, and it makes all of the sense in the world to restore the natural tone of the abdomen for the task at hand, being it plain contemplation. Like you don't need to be hard bracing for impact if you're swinging yourself in the hammock, unless you see that you're gonna fall from the hammock. But
Right.
otherwise, you're just triggering your nervous system to be ready for a demanding action that needs core strength and protection to your digestive organs. Otherwise, like it was very clear to me, and I'm sure for the sensualists here watching, listening us, it was also very clear to feel like the deep relief of letting all hang out and noticing the difference, the immediate difference in the tone of the neck, the shoulders, and the screeching of the teeth. And this is like a practical application of what we have been talking about, that you said that this is about the process and taking agency and being self-referential in the way that, am I tightening the abdomen because I want to, or because I've I'm expected to, even though no one is watching me?
Right. Or also, oh wow, my abdomen is contracted. I'm holding my breath. Am I anxious about something right now? It also it
Wow.
has that too. We can go, wow, I'm doing that. Is there a reason? And sometimes there's a reason long before we're conscious, so we
Yes.
can look at that. Is it habit? Is there a reason that I'm not conscious of? Or like you said, and that's where all that choice comes in. That's where all that agency comes in, to be self-referential. Yeah.
Yeah. Looking in and asking questions, because the body never lies. Like our own physiology, like was here in a systemic way before our brain. So it's very nice too, and like also very calming. Like I don't need to be like super extra smart or more intelligent or more skilled. Like I'm already alive and doing great things. And when I turn inwards to this sensitivity, I can discover that I am more, not only more efficient, but that I am having a good time, that I can delight in the
Yeah.
moment by moment
Yeah.
process.
Yeah. It's so interesting that we learn not to give that to ourselves, because children don't deny themselves that, right? It's only once we're socialized. And we can re-socialize ourselves. And the other amazing thing is, the more of us doing it, the more we give permission to do it.
Yes.
Yeah. And we build those cultures with each other as we do it, very
Yeah.
much so. Yeah.
We
I'll
inspire.
go back to the house thing. When my first son was born, I was lucky that there was a group of women in the neighborhood who also had kids at the same time. And we would get together once a week and put all the babies on the floor and, hang out. And I remember once saying something about like, oh, excuse the mess or something. And one of them saying like, okay, like we're just not going to say that anymore. Like, can we all make an agreement? None of us are going to say that to each other, right? About our homes, about whatever, for example. And that seems so small, right? But it's big, it's big. And it's just like the belly, like softening your belly, you know, um, you see somebody do that, and not only so my friends, we were giving each other verbal permission, but there's a lot of amazing information now about how our brains synchronize. through our heartbeat and through smell, actually, is a big piece of how the brains find synchronicity. But you know, when you're around someone who is in that state, just like I saw it in my friend who inspired me to go study Feldenkrais, that's not something magical that it is I could sense in her presence. And we now have lots of great brain studies that explain why we know these things, you know, when we're with people. Yeah. So it really does start to build a different culture. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then we feel supported because we're social. We want to be in it with other people. We don't want to be outliers all the time. You know, we just.
But it's a different life, socializing and being in and as community when we are self-referenced, because then it's truly us who is coming forth and sharing and being present instead of complying with your idea of their idea, because you never truly know, it's just the projection. And when you are running in this like somatical embodied truth, then the interchange is sincere, meaningful, creative, like these mothers that brought their babies in your community. It came as something natural, and it's beautiful that we get to have this understanding beyond the discursive mind, simply by how we are locating ourselves in the relational space. If we are like going outside of ourselves to please or to be accepted or to be validated, when we're in contrast to being like self-referenced, self-connected, sensitive.
Right. And it's like, I feel like it's when we become real adults.
Yes. Yes. You know? Maturity.
Because we're really taking responsibility for ourselves, right? Like 100% saying, okay, well, I'm responsible. And I think when we're with people doing that, we also experience relief because someone's not asking us to do something that like really isn't ours to do, you know? So it really is, it's an amazing feeling when we can do that with each other. It's really an incredible thing. Yeah.
Yeah. It is.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel it now talking to you, you know, and I'm like, wow, it's so nice.
We are in this lovely resonance with the people listening to us as well. Somehow, some way, there is this connection that happens in an authentic and embodied way that sustain the joy, the pleasure of being here, present in this moment, and sharing.
Yeah.
Thank you, Astra. This great experience talking with you. So tell us, how can we learn more about what you're doing?
You can go to my website and I have my TED Talk on there, as well as how to get in touch with me. I send out, you know, information. I write a blog and share workshops, and I teach workshops online. So you can reach me at Astra, ASTRACOYLE.com, astracoyle.com.
Yeah. Wonderful. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. So much fun. So nice to meet you and be with you. Thank you.
And Sensualist. So go to astracoyle.com and learn more about her doings in Feldenkrais and culture, movement, and all things good. Also, if you haven't already, go grab the guide to Awaken Sensuality. It's free at www.centraldepoder.com, and catch you next time. Until then, remember to take the time to sense your fire so you can share the flame.